I'll try. Thank you. We had to perform some extreme agile maneuvers because, to give people a break. So now you've had some coffee in you. Hopefully you'll be a little bit more awake. So the title of my talk is Our Documentation Team Agile Manifesto. It's still a work in progress because this is the first, this is actually the second version of a talk that I gave here. Been giving in a few conferences. So I'm going to talk about who the hell am I, what do I want, my personal agile experience, and our documentation team agile experience, and I'll leave some time for questions. So I am a technical writer. It means I write technical documentations for a living. I don't know how many writers or documentation people are here. Nice. Excellent. So if anybody has any documentation questions, you can come up to me later. I'm always happy to geek out about docs. So I work for Red Hat. I document JBoss middleware. Not as exciting as some other projects you have. We have the OpenStack or whatever, but it's pretty neat stuff. It's pretty geeky. I really like it. I'm based in Brno, Czech Republic. I'm originally from Israel. This is when I found out I wasn't going to be able to use my computer. That's my desktop background. So whenever I give a talk and I plug my computer in, it's the first thing people see on the screen. So this is in the Negev Desert in Israel, and it's the Ramon Crater, and it's one of the most beautiful places in Israel. So the first line is basically what I do, and I get paid to do it. The rest of the stuff I do because I care. I'm active in a community called Write the Docs. It's a documentation community, series of conferences, events for people who care about documentation. We get open source, closed source. We got product managers, developers, sysadmins, everybody who is interested in making documentation better, more useful. So we have events in the States and in Europe. We have a conference coming up in Prague in September. So you can follow us and see what's happening there. I am a Scrum Master and Agile coach, basically self-taught or taught by people around me. It started in my previous job. Before I joined Red Hat, I was working for a company called Informatica, and they were an Agile shop. They actually worked with SAFe, which is a scaled Agile. So, and it started out with this one development team needed a Scrum Master, and they asked me if I'd be interested to picking it up, doing it on the side, and I was like, yeah, why not? And then I just kind of fell in love with it, and I've been doing it unofficially and helping out different teams. And then I joined Red Hat, and they don't, as a rule, they don't work in Agile, but they believe that every product organization should use the process and the tools that's best for them. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit later. I put a lot of emphasis on being friendly to newcomers. I organize Django Girls workshops, which is a programming workshop for women. And it's basically, it gives women the opportunity to experience building a Django website. Django is a web framework built in Python. And are similar programs like PyLadies and Rails Girls. So this is a relatively new program. It started last summer in EuroPython. So I participated in that workshop, and STX Next was sponsoring it. That's how I met Agatha and everybody. And the EuroPython workshop that's coming up, I actually just got invited to organize that. So I'm very, very active in that sense. And it's beautiful because you get to give people the opportunity to experience something new and experience technology. And it also gives you a chance to practice empathy and practice inclusiveness, which is something that I find I need to do a lot in my tech writing activities and also in my agile activities, because you need to get buy-in from people, right? So you need to have people on board of what it is, whatever it is that you're trying to do. And yes, I am genuinely excited about all the things. I might be from Israel, but I grew up in California, where you can do everything and you can be anything you want to be. So that kind of stayed with me. And I've been, although it's funny because now I live in Europe and people are just kind of like, yes, that was funny. And so I try to not let that get in the way, but hopefully it's a little contagious. So one of the things, like I said, this is an evolved version of the talk that I used to give. I started giving it last year, about a year ago. It was called My Personal Tech Writing Agile Manifesto. And it basically talked about how after I left the Agile shop that I was working at and moved to Red Hat, I was confronted with an utterly chaotic work pattern. No Agile, nothing to do with it. But I still felt like I wanted to take the principles that I learned and apply them to my work, because I felt it was useful for me. So apparently, it's kind of, I guess it would be similar to this get things done thing that I've never heard of, but I'm going to look into that. So one of the things that I always reminded myself was the original definition of the word agile, right? And it's sort of getting back to basics to tie into the gentleman that was before me. You know, there's a lot of things that evolution of agile over the years, you know, it's been abused, it's been, you know, buzzed, and it's been shot down and so many times, and we kind of forget really what it means. And I just like this picture, I think it's funny. And that's basically, you want to save time, you want to deliver things faster and better and more adaptable to change. So I'm going to share the story of how I've taken the principles that I've adapted to my own work, and I've used those to build and deploy, I think successfully, an agile-like development model in the documentation team that I work at. So this is one of the reasons why I really like to give this talk, is because we now have a working continuous delivery model for a non-development team with a development team that does not work in Agile. So we've basically agiled ourselves, and we run it, we manage it autonomously. And we seem to manage to work out with all the other stakeholders that we work with. So about September 2012, Red Hat acquires FuseSource. FuseSource is what became JBoss Fuse. JBoss Fuse is an enterprise service bus. It's a middleware product. It's Frankenstein from a lot of different open source components and put together to give data processing and management solutions. So FuseSource was a distributed company, which basically means that everybody just kind of worked out of their homes all over the world, and they were very chaotic, but they were small enough that they kind of, they work with it. And then in comes Red Hat, a 7,000 person publicly traded American company with lots of processes, right? And lots of different requirements, and you had to do a lot more planning, a lot more overhead. So the chaotic development pattern seemed to, so they tried to integrate, right? So, and this has been done it's been done for a couple of years now already. So they're doing better, but it's always difficult when you have such different ways of looking at your development cycles, right? So the writers at the time that came in with the acquisition, they kept working in the same way that FuseSource was working at. And then about a year later, I get hired to Red Hat to work for this team, right? And I come in with my hyperactive, super crazy agile, evangelistic kind of attitude, and I'm like, so what's up? And they're like, well, we just kind of do this, and we sort of try to follow along with the development team, and it's just so we have the added complexity of having to adapt constantly, not just to what our, let's say, Red Hat customers want, but also what our internal customers, right, which are basically our stakeholders, our product managers, our development teams, support, all the different parts of the organization that we have to provide documentation services for, I guess, or our product. So then I come in and then I start building and presenting and trying to get buy-in on the different agile things that I've been doing with my own work, right? So I would literally time box myself and give myself retrospectives, and it's kind of weird, but it worked for me, right? Because it helped me stay sane, right? And then about March or April of last year, or May even. This is why I had the dates, I had dates on this, and he told me to take them off, and I'm like, I can't remember when things happen. That's why I have to write it down. So we got a new director for content services, and this guy I love because he just came in and he said, let's change everything. Let's look at everything we do, and let's see what we need, what we don't need, what we can do better, and he basically just opened up the floor to examine anything from our tool chain to our writing formats, to our publication mechanisms, to how we manage our teams, right? So a few things happened with that. We had a few initiatives, sort of org-wide initiatives in content services. And one of them was a continuous delivery initiative. So how do we create shorter, more adaptable, iterative documentation publication models, right? So it's just like when you take a waterfall, dev team, and then you break them down into iterations. So we have, just like developments, Developers, you build a version, you release it, and then you got to start running patches on it while you're working on the next version. So like we had to examine how to do that in the most effective way. So then a few things happened. I said, ooh, this is a great opportunity to test, to see if I can sort of scale up this autonomous, agile-like working process to the team. Now, this is me and 2 more writers, right? So we're 3 people, and one of them was also an unofficial doc lead, and this is another great change that has helped us in a lot of different ways, and especially now for the stuff that I've been working on, because instead of having documentation teams where one of them just happens to also be a doc lead, who takes care of distributing all the tasks and assigning roles and figuring out resources, we stopped doing that and we created 2 roles. So they started adding program managers and content strategists. I was just making sure that I'm on time. And we're starting to readjust the team. So I'm going to touch that a little bit later. So what we did was, the first thing was we had all of our requirements for the release were just basically like flat lists, of issues, and everything was handwritten, and we didn't really have an issue tracking platform like the developers did. JBoss works in Jira. Red Hat also has Bugzilla. Depending on which product you're working on, the developers use whatever tool they have. But we didn't really have our own sort of project tracking system. So that was the first step, right? So in this mad scientist montage from about July, or June, July, till about August, right? I was hacking at this problem to see how we can build a system that will allow us to have transparent task tracking integrated with our development team as much as possible, and to be able to time box or iterate our documentation work, right? And I tried to be obviously very careful when I talk about agile stuff, because people, some just kind of, it does encounter some resistance initially. But I had a skeleton proposal, and we kept fleshing it out, and then I deployed a small POC of the system, and the system basically included a standalone Jira project for our documentation team. So just like our development team for JBoss Fuse has their own Jira project, we have our own Jira project, because we have because we wanted to get links between our issues and the development issues, and we wanted to be able to get automation as much as possible around the stuff that we do. So we built this thing, and we used the same schema that the developers use, because we figured it would play nicely with the existing ecosystem, right? And then what we did was we created an Agile, Jira Agile module, which I love, because it's really robust and it's really flexible, and it really gave us what we needed. So I've set up a Scrum board. The only reason I set up a Scrum board and not a Kanban board was because of sprints, right? Because we work right now on 3-week sprints. We started with 2, and we realized it's not enough. So this is one of the things I like about the evolution of this this process, is because we were constantly giving each other feedback and self-reflecting even before we deployed it, right? So in about September, we started our first sprint, and it was a bit slow going at first, because a lot of people didn't. I was the only one who actually worked in Agile before. There was a lot of concepts that needed to be explained. So we had to remind ourselves to, be gentle with ourselves, and not, saying like, oh, if we can't get it right the first time, like someone's talking about design versus evolution. You're not going to get it perfect, right from the very beginning, but you have to keep working at it to adjust, and you fine tune it all the time. So in about December, we got our own, following this realignment of the Red Hat documentation units, we got our own content strategist and program manager. So basically what we have now is we have writers, and we have a program manager who acts as a tech lead or a doc lead, and then we have a content strategist on top of that. And if you want to compare it, you can compare it to a product owner and a team lead or a tech lead, right? So the content strategist would sit in on all the product meetings and the release meetings. And they would translate the product requirements to documentation requirements. And what needs to be documented, which things our customers need. And then the program manager would take these requirements, break them down into tasks, and do all the resource allocation and make sure that we are meeting our goals and that we can get everything documented before the release. For JBoss Fuse right now, those two roles are the same person, and we're actually probably going to separate them now because that person never sleeps. So it's difficult to wear too many hats like that, even if they're all red. So then in January, we got merged with, another product. So JBoss Fuse and JBoss Fuse ServiceWorks started getting merged. And so we grew from 3 writers to 9 writers. And the 3 writers we had before I'm in Brno, and one of the doc lead was in Germany, and another writer in the States. And on top of that, we now have 3 or 4 writers in India and 2 more in Australia. So we cover all of the time zones in between us in one doc team, right? But by the time that we got the new writers into our team, our workflow was stable enough, and the workflow was documented enough and clear enough that they were able to be onboarded within, I think it took almost 2 weeks of several training sessions and experimentations, and then they joined our following sprint. And we're right now on our 2nd sprint together, so it's still fairly new, and there's still a lot of stuff that we need to work on. I'll touch on that later. But they weren't, they were worried in the beginning because the two, merging products is never easy. And they had to learn a whole new set of things, and we had such a unique way of working. But as soon as I gave them some of the training, and I sort of coached them a little bit and gave them some pep talks and stuff. I mean, it didn't take much, but they really saw the benefit of it. So now this is an example of what our requirements looked like. And we use Mojo for our document management and stuff like that. So we just had a Mojo document, and this is a list of Jira issues, and people can go and collaborate on a document. But if you see, there's 1, 2, 3 links in this example. But if you take this example and make it 10 times longer with whatever subheadings you might have, that's our workload for an entire release, right? So it's a mess. And now what we basically have is we run everything through the board. So we have a single access point, and everybody knows where to go. So this is when we are planning mode. So we see the epics on the left side, the sprint issues in the middle, the main pane. Below the sprint, you have the backlog. So you can actually drag issues into the sprint. And who uses Jira Agile? Excellent. So I don't have to talk about that. Isn't it cool? And no, I'm really happy about this because we can basically integrate into the same system that our developers use. So then we have our board, and then we have a dashboard that. So this was actually nice because we customized this dashboard because some of the management doesn't really integrate with Jira all that much, some of the more upper management, but all you need to do is send them a link to the dashboard and they see everything. So what is it that works for us? And the benefits of this for us is the way that we have our sprints. It keeps us on top of things, right? There's a lot of stuff, because our developers don't work in Agile, how am I doing? Because our developers are not working in Agile, then there's a lot of stuff that's not ready to document in the beginning of the release, right? So what we used to have is a lot of dead time, right? We release a product and then we just kind of hang out, maybe fix some typos, fix some links, restructure some stuff, refactor some things, but we didn't actually, we had a lot of waste. We had a lot of waste of time. So then what we can do is if we have everything in one central place, we can actually divide our time to, let's say, earlier in the release, when we don't have so many new features to document, we can focus more on fixing bugs from previous releases. Or we can finally get to that use case scenario that we always wanted to document and would be really valuable for customers, but we never have time because we always have to document features, right? So we're able to get a different breakdown and look at our, all we need to see is the 3-week sprint in front of us, you know? So things don't look so scary. People know, you know, you don't have to keep all this information in your head. You pick your tasks, you have your program manager who is in charge of seeing the big picture, you know, what sort of things have higher priority, you know, what needs to be going out. Like we have closed loop feedback with customers now, which is amazing for documentation as well. You know, we have customers I was in London and I met with some people from one of our customers. They didn't even know they can file documentation bugs or send documentation feedback. And as soon as and they're like, oh wow, you know, you guys actually you know, listen to customers and you seek out, and I'm like, yes. You know, like if you do it for software, you know, there's no reason not to do it for your documentation. It's just as much a deliverable as your code, which is, not everybody thinks like that, but that's one of the reasons why I do these things, right? You know, I mean, I really do care about documentation, and I think that as soon as people, you know, the more people realize that it's important, that it should be sort of a first-class citizen with your development, it's going to help everybody, you know, because your documentation is such an important part of the user experience and the customer experience, but it often gets, you know, trailed behind. So one of these, anyway, so on top of your tasks, right? So I need to sprint my talk. So we have our board, our Kanban sprint board. Gives us transparency. We can see what everybody's working on, you know, the usual stuff. It also helps, like I said, again, you focus on the task at hand now. You're not thinking about, oh, you know, in 3 months that other thing is going to be ready or whatever, right? So we do have retrospectives after every sprint, and that helps us uncover problems quickly and be able to adapt to them, especially since the process is so new, you know, and we have so many new people working in this process that I actually had an interesting story where during a retrospective, somebody said like one sentence that just triggered a question, and it turns out, later we scheduled a call, and it turns out that there was a giant bag of problems that this person wasn't communicating because they didn't think they should, or they weren't sure, you know, whether it was their job or someone else's job, or they didn't realize that they needed to raise a flag, basically. So because we were able to catch that in a retrospective, then it had nothing to do with the process, right? A retrospective is just for the process, you know, but together we figured out that there's another huge problem, and we're able to escalate that up to the management. And now that person is, you know, cries a lot less because they don't have to work so hard on things they shouldn't have been working on in the first place, you know, and we are having much more communication with, you know, the quality assurance teams, the engineering teams. They know that we work in a continuous delivery model. Doesn't mean that they want to do it themselves, but they appreciate that. And so they're very, very supportive. And we've actually managed to standardize things like SME review when we send content out for review. Because it used to be that we just kind of send something, you know, send a chapter to review, and it comes back to us whenever, you know. But then we have our sprints, right? So a task is not complete. If I go back to our columns, we have draft in progress, we have SME review, peer review, and completed, right? So this is our unique documentation workflow, right? So when we send content out to SME review, we basically create a subtask and assign it to whoever in the engineering or QA team that needs to review it. And so we're so well integrated into the system that we're actually able to create tasks for them, right? Because we all live in the same Jira world. So we were able to standardize turnaround time for engineering and QE review on the documents that we send them, which is amazing because just by the fact that we raised this problem, because we weren't able to complete our tasks during the sprint because, you know, the developers were just lazy and they wouldn't give us stuff back, right? So, you know, indirectly we help improve the process across teams, right? Without asking anybody to work in sprints and without, you know, evangelizing on it. You can do your thing, we can do our thing, as long as we communicate and play nicely with each other. So the clear role division keeps us focused, meaning now we have our program manager. That program manager is in charge of doing the time estimates and doing the prioritization of our tasks. And there's also a really nifty little flag that we have called ready to doc, because we have a waterfall development team, there's a lot of features that are not going to be ready to document for another 3 months. So when we look at our board, if I go back, if I want to pick something, I just have a filter ready to doc, and I filter out, and then I don't end up accidentally picking a task for a feature that hasn't yet been developed, right? So again, you save time, you be effective, and you know exactly what you're working on, and you know that you're going to have the resources that you need. Because when we document a feature, we need to have a certain percentage of the development already done. It doesn't need to be completely done, but it needs to be stable enough for us to be able to document it. And that also helps us to decide as late as possible and deliver as quickly as possible, because we are very much attuned to the development of all these features. And the processes and tools serve us. This is something that I'm still having some trouble with, because every now and then somebody will come up and say, well, I know you work in Jira Agile, but some other manager told me that Trello is really nice. Why don't we use that on top of your Jira Agile too? And I'm like, so people have a tendency to get distracted by tools and processes, and that's true for everybody. So when I was choosing a tool for our workflow, right, I was looking at Trello, I was looking at all sorts of different things, and then it was very clear to me that we need the right tool for the job, and the tool that's going to give us the most automation, the most integration, and that it doesn't take, you don't have to train to be a certified Jira administrator to run it, So that's what works. Of course, there are still a lot of things that need work, especially since we're literally on our second sprint as with a 9-person team. So most of them, I'd like to say all of them. I'm the only one who's ever worked in Agile before. So it was a lot of, first of all, I needed to calm them down and, and help them sort of remove a lot of the fear obstacles. Because a lot of these people have been working in the same products for years, and in the same, they're like, oh, what is this thing that I don't even know, right? I don't have to tell you about that. So there was a lot of sort of gentle training that had to go for that. And we do have a lot of things that we're still not very good at. So notice I haven't really been talking about any metrics or KPIs, because we're honestly not at the point where we can just, click the KPI button and get everything we need, right? Like, we're still training people on the process, and we're trying to stabilize it. So we divided this project to several goals. The first goal was to time box, right? And to get us working in time boxing units. The second goal was to start tracking our task time. And we don't work in points, we work in hours. I'm still not, the jury's out on whether or not I should try to push for points. So we still work in hours, and we want to be able to, I want to get that burn down chart stabilized. So that's the sort of coaching phase that we're in right now. Because people need to get used to doing their time tracking, because they just used to put something in a document and say, I'm done, or it's in progress. How do you know if you're utilizing your time effectively, right? So that's what I'm focusing on right now. The next step is going to be a little bit more high level or global sort of reporting. So we have distributed team, which means we have 2 of every meeting, because Australia and between Australia and the States, somebody's going to get a very late night or a very early morning. So we have a weekly team meeting that has nothing to do with the Agile process. We don't have daily scrums, because it's how are you going to get all these people in the same space? But we do have a weekly meeting. We have one-on-one meetings, and we are a small enough team that we're able to just communicate ad hoc with each other. So I don't know if that's going to be possible to standardize. So we're still looking at that. We do have a sprint kickoff meeting, which basically the first half is we're wrapping up the previous sprint, and then we're starting the next sprint. And those meetings, we have one in the morning, and this is burnout time, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So we start out with Australia, and they fix their stuff up, and then we move on and we go to the Europe and the States. And by the end of that day, we have we've kicked off a new sprint. So the development itself is still chaotic, but thanks to our sprint time boxing efforts, we're able to uncover things like they changed a bunch of things, let's say in the UI, and they were only going to deliver it in like, I don't know, a month or 2 months, but let's say I had to document something that has to do with the UI that was right next to the one they changed, or like that integrated with it. So because I was working on it and I had to finish that task, I was like, wait a minute, something is different there. So we were able to uncover all these things. So we do run into some problems when we try to work around them. So there's a lot of customizing going around it, which is why I called our process Agile-like. So, you either do it all or you do nothing, right? But I don't care because the principles have value, right? Like, I don't care if people say, oh, you're not doing Agile. It doesn't matter, it works, Where the point is to be aware of your process and to be self-reflective and to constantly strive to improve, right? So if we can use the methods and the tips and tricks from these things, then why not? So like I said, the bureaucracy and the upper management, every now and then somebody will get, their panties in a twist and say, hey, how about you use this management tool for something? And we're like, how about I give you an alternate POC of this is how we came up with that Jira dashboard that I showed you earlier. Because somebody said, well, why don't you use Trello? But I'm like, there's no scripting around it. It doesn't work. And, there's no automation around it. We have to actually manually type in everything. So I'm like, let me get back to you on that. And literally within 10 minutes, I had a dashboard, right? And we were able to use our current system to do that. So these things still happen. And we try to tackle it as we go along. And, at the end of it, we're still building everything, right? So it's still fragile, and we still need to get the process ingrained, right? Like we need to get people used to the sort of state of mind of working in this process. But, if we're talking about change management, I think they've done really, really well. Especially because, it's scary, right? Like you get someone going, hey, I have this crazy idea, let's change everything. And they're like, what? So, but they were really on it, and I'm really, really proud of it because it's helping us be more effective, be more sane. It's like our little island of sanity in a sea of chaos, right? And we're able to deliver better, quicker, and integrate better with everybody else around us. So people are starting to notice it a little bit in the company, not necessarily, we haven't really exploded it all over the place, but I'm hoping that we can inspire other teams to do it as well. Yeah, I think oh yes, I'm done.
Any questions?
I was absolutely clear on everything. I like it.
Otherwise, I'll have a question. How far do you think you can push this? How similar is documentation to software development that all the same ideas apply?
Honestly, there's actually a great, it's a growing movement to treat your documentation like a product. So there's a bunch of talks circulating about it, a bunch of blogs, mainly from writers who are trying to increase awareness for documentation. So if you look at it, we'll always have a dependency, right, on our development. But if you're ignoring things like README-driven development and things like that, if you want to geek out about that later, talk to me. When you write your README instead of a spec, right? So you write README first and then you develop. So we'll always have to align our deliverables with the development deliverables. But the way that we work can also, so there are certain things here that I can't do, right? Like I can't change requirements. We have hard requirements and we have a release schedule. So we're actually dealing with that right now if we have a release coming up at some point.
You have probably requirements in terms of like this needs to be documented, but you probably have like a billion ways of documenting the same thing. You could gather end user feedback and as a requirement, right?
Yeah, we do. We do. We have our closed loop program, which is what I was talking about when I went when the customer didn't even know they can give feedback, right? So we have an independent system of tracking customer feedback that's content services specific. It's not necessarily related to any business unit, right? So the development team, the product unit, will have their own customer requirements for the product, but we treat our documentation like its own product. So if our customers are screaming for tutorials, right, we will prioritize that, and we will see how many features we need to document, and based on that, we'll see how we can fit it in. We also are working towards the just barely good enough model, right? So, which means that we're trying to steer away from doing super broad, like, detailed coverage of every single thing in the product, and rather focus more on what's useful for our customers, right? So instead of, like, I don't know if you have a software that you, instead of giving the user all the options, you kind of help them flow through it, you know? So this is something that we do, this is regardless of the process, right? This is just a philosophy of getting more useful documentation and usable documentation. So when we put our user experience first, then we can actually have a solid voice to influence how we manage our time, what we invest in, right? So if the product has, I don't know, 20 features, but maybe 5 of them are super high profile and they're very, very useful, then we're going to focus on those. And there are certain things that might be tech preview, or there are certain things that we might not even release everything at the same time, right? There are certain things that we can only document after the GA kit is done, right? So we release those afterwards. But if we have our organized workflow, we can figure out when to do that. You know, so at the end of the day, it's about balancing out the customer feedback that we get as content services people and the feedback we get from our engineering teams. So we've actually changed from engineering content services to customer content services, which gives us more leverage, which gives us a bigger voice, which is nice because, you know, you spend all this time, you know, being a writer in a developer's world, you know, the second-class citizen. But it's good because then we can integrate better, and we don't have to trail behind all these different things from the developers. So you have to hide behind the engineers. You know, we can actually become experts in our field. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.